The CNN studio was alive, flooded with blinding white lights and the constant hum of high-voltage energy. Every camera was locked, every microphone was hot. Every movement inside the room felt magnified, like the air itself was waiting for a storm to break. The audience seating was packed with journalists, legal analysts, and political aides. Behind the cameras, producers whispered instructions frantically, their voices tense and clipped. They knew tonight wasn't just another segment. Tonight was different. Tonight was historic. Slowly, almost deliberately, the main camera panned across the stage, capturing the charged atmosphere before locking its focus on Jasmine Crockett. She sat motionless, poised, unshaken, unbothered. Her scarlet-red blazer blazed under the bright studio lights, a bold declaration of confidence and defiance. She didn't need to speak, her silence spoke louder than words. Her hands rested gently on the desk, but her eyes told another story. They burned with quiet determination, a fire fueled by years of fighting battles most people never see. Across from her, Alan Dershowitz sat, arms folded neatly, his back straight, his expression unyielding. The legendary Harvard law professor, the man whose name had been etched into 5 decades of American legal history, was ready for war. His dark navy suit was crisp, his glasses perched at the tip of his nose. His jaw was set with quiet arrogance, his entire demeanor radiating absolute certainty. In his mind, Harvard's reputation, his years of Supreme Court victories, and his intellectual dominance would crush any challenge that dared rise against him. The control room behind the glass wall buzzed like an overcharged machine. Technicians signaled each other, adjusting audio levels, monitoring live feeds from around the country. Everyone knew millions of Americans were watching this moment unfold in real time. Every word, every look, every silence would be dissected by analysts before the night was over. And yet, despite the hum of technology, despite the faint rustle of papers, and the whisper of producers inside the studio itself, there was silence. An eerie, unnatural silence. It was the kind of silence that tightens your chest and makes you hold your breath without realizing it. The kind that comes just before a lightning strike, just before the thunder hits. Jasmine sat perfectly still. Alan sat perfectly still. The cameras closed in on both of them. Their faces filled the screens of millions watching at home. This wasn't just another legal debate. This wasn't just another political clash. This was a collision of worlds. A rising star forged by 15 years of courtroom battles was about to challenge a Harvard giant who had shaped American law for half a century. One woman, one legend, one stage. And the moment the storm hit, someone's legacy would shatter forever. The silence broke as the host adjusted his microphone. His voice carried the weight of the moment, steady but laced with urgency. Tonight, he declared, we confront a question that could define the future of American democracy. The topic, presidential immunity. It wasn't just another legal argument. It wasn't just another debate on cable television. This was about power at its highest level, about whether the President of the United States, the most powerful person in the world, should stand above the law or be bound by it like every other American. In Washington, politicians were glued to their screens. In New York, legal scholars prepared their notes, ready to dissect every word. In living rooms across America, families sat forward, eyes fixed, because they knew the answer to this debate would ripple through every corner of the nation. The stakes couldn't be higher. If presidential immunity were too broad, a leader could act like a king, untouchable, unquestionable, unpunished. If it were too narrow, every decision could be paralyzed by fear of lawsuits and investigations. It was a razor's edge, and tonight that razor was in the hands of two people, Alan Dershowitz, the Harvard giant, and Jasmine Crockett, the rising star from Texas. The host's voice rose as he introduced them, like two gladiators stepping into the arena. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we witness a clash between two of the sharpest legal minds in America. On my left, Professor Alan Dershowitz, a man who has argued before the Supreme Court 17 times, a scholar whose writings line law libraries across the country. And on my right, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a civil rights attorney turned legislator known for her fiery cross-examinations and fearless courtroom victories. The words echoed through the studio. Two figures, two legacies. One question that would alter the very balance of American power. The debate was about to begin. Alan Dershowitz leaned forward, his glasses catching the studio light. The corners of his mouth tightened, and when he spoke, his voice sliced through the silence like a knife. Congresswoman, he said, his tone dripping with icy contempt, Your understanding of constitutional law is embarrassingly basic. Frankly, I wonder what law school even gave you a degree, because they clearly failed to teach you the fundamentals." The words landed like a thunderclap. The audience gasped audibly. The host froze mid-breath, his pen hovering above his notes. Cameras zoomed in on shocked faces across the room, producers exchanging panicked glances, aides whispering frantically. Even seasoned journalists in the press row arched their brows, stunned at the bluntness of the insult. It wasn't just an attack on Jasmine Crockett's argument. It was an attack on her very identity as a lawyer. A dismissal not of her words, but of her worth. And yet Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't scramble to respond. She didn't even move. For 3 long seconds, she sat perfectly still, her eyes locked on Dershowitz. And in those eyes, there was no fear. There was calculation. There was fire. There was a plan. While the nation saw a young congresswoman insulted, underestimated, belittled, Jasmine Crockett was already preparing to turn the entire debate upside down. For more than 5 decades, Alan Dershowitz had carried the weight of Harvard's authority on his shoulders. His name was etched into American legal history, his words quoted in law schools across the nation. To millions of Americans watching tonight, Dershowitz wasn't just a professor. He was an institution. His victories before the U.S. Supreme Court were legendary 17 arguments, countless high-profile cases, decades of shaping constitutional thought. When Dershowitz spoke, even his critics listened. He wasn't just respected, he was feared. It was as if Harvard itself, its towering gates, its centuries of prestige, its relentless academic power was sitting at the table with him tonight. Dershowitz didn't just bring arguments. He brought the weight of an empire, and across from him sat Jasmine Crockett. To much of the audience, she was the underdog. Yes, she had built a career as a fierce civil rights attorney. Yes, she had spent 15 years in courtrooms defending those without a voice. But against Harvard's crown jewel, against a man whose opinions had shaped presidents and policies, most thought this would be an execution, not a debate. On social media, legal analysts were already predicting disaster. Dershowitz will dismantle her in minutes. This isn't even a fair fight. Crockett's going to get steamrolled on national television. The tension was suffocating. In the control room, CNN producers whispered, nervously worried this might turn into a public humiliation. And for millions watching live, it seemed inevitable. Tonight, Jasmine Crockett was walking into a storm she couldn't possibly survive. Or so they thought. In the back rows of the CNN studio, the tension was palpable. Political advisors leaned in close, whispering urgently to one another, their voices barely audible beneath the studio silence. Camera operators, sensing the shift in energy, discreetly turned their lenses toward the Crockett team, capturing every nervous glance, every stiffened jaw. On Crockett's side of the aisle, her aides sat frozen, their shoulders rigid, eyes darting between her and the towering figure across the table. One of them gripped a pen so tightly it snapped between his fingers. Another pressed her hand against her forehead, whispering, this could ruin her. The murmurs weren't limited to her team. In the press section, journalists exchanged knowing looks, some already typing headlines into their laptops. Dershowitz dominates Crockett in explosive CNN debate. Harvard giant humiliates rising congresswoman live. In the control room, producers argued in hushed tones over their headsets. One voice crackled over the feed. "Do we cut to commercial if this gets ugly?" Another responded sharply. "No, this is television history. Keep the cameras rolling." To the untrained eye, it looked as though the narrative had already been written. Jasmine Crockett was about to be dismantled live in front of millions. Even some of her closest advisors began lowering their heads, bracing for impact. But then the camera caught her face. Jasmine sat there utterly calm. No fidgeting, no panic, no anger. Just a subtle shift in her breathing, a quiet stillness in her posture, and in her eyes something different. Not defeat, not fear, but a fire slowly taking shape like the spark before an explosion. The audience didn't see it yet. Her team didn't see it yet. But Jasmine Crockett was not preparing to surrender. She was preparing to strike back. And then something happened. Something so small, so subtle, but the cameras caught it instantly. Jasmine Crockett leaned back ever so slightly in her chair, her shoulders relaxing as if she had just exhaled the weight of the entire room. And there it was at the corner of her lips, a half smile. Not wide, not obvious, but deliberate. The kind of smile that says, "I know something you don't." The studio, still wrapped in silence, felt the energy shift, though no one could explain why. Producers froze mid-sentence in the control room. The camera operators instinctively zoomed in, framing her face tightly for millions watching live. It was a tiny flicker of confidence, but inside this pressure cooker, it felt earth-shaking. That half-smile wasn't arrogance. It wasn't defiance. It was something far more dangerous: calm control. And in that moment, something became crystal clear to anyone paying close attention. Jasmine Crockett wasn't cornered. She wasn't flustered. She wasn't even close to being defeated. She was waiting. Patiently. Silently. And everyone watching, Alan Dershowitz included, was about to find out why. And then Jasmine Crockett moved. Slowly, deliberately. Like a chess master advancing a single piece in a match where every move could change history. She placed her right hand gently on the black leather portfolio resting beside her chair. For a brief moment, the studio lights bounced off its polished surface, catching the camera's focus. The room fell into absolute silence. No one spoke. No one breathed. Even Alan Dershowitz shifted slightly in his seat, his gaze narrowing as he watched her. With steady fingers, Crockett unlatched the clasp, a soft click echoing through the microphone like a gun cocking in a quiet room. Then, with infinite patience, she opened the portfolio in full view of the cameras and pulled out a single thin document. A simple motion, but it changed everything. For the millions watching live, time seemed to slow. The camera zoomed in tight, following every subtle detail: the smooth texture of the leather, the delicate rustle of paper, the calm precision in Crockett's movements, as if she had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times before. And yet no one knew what it was. Not the host, not the audience, not even Dershowitz. Was it evidence, a letter, a secret ruling, or something else entirely? One thing was certain: that single document held the power to flip this entire debate on its head. In homes across America, millions leaned closer to their screens. In the CNN control room, producers barked into headsets, "Stay on our hands, zoom in, do not cut away." The world was watching, and Jasmine Crockett was about to change everything. Jasmine Crockett lifted her head slowly, her movements deliberate, calculated, a predator preparing to strike. Her eyes locked on Alan Dershowitz with laser-sharp precision, the kind of gaze that doesn't just look at you, it cuts through you. She leaned forward slightly, placed the thin document on the desk, and in a voice calm yet commanding, she spoke. "Professor, I was hoping you'd say that." The words dropped like a grenade. The studio exploded. Gasps erupted from the audience. The host froze mid-breath, his mouth hanging open, pen slipping from his hand. One camera operator muttered under his breath, "Oh my God." On the other side, Dershowitz's team shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Fingers tapped nervously against tablet screens. An aide whispered frantically into a headset, This isn't good." And Dershowitz himself, for the first time all night, he blinked. Not much, just enough for the cameras to catch it. That subtle, involuntary flicker, the first crack in his perfectly controlled armor. Crockett's tone remained calm, almost unnervingly so. No anger, no raised voice, no rushed words. Just precision, the kind of precision that terrifies powerful men more than shouting ever could. Across America, millions of viewers leaned closer to their screens, hearts pounding. They didn't know what was coming, but in that moment, everyone felt it. The balance of power had just shifted. The tension in the studio was suffocating. No one moved, no one spoke, and then Jasmine Crockett did something no one expected. She reached into her sleek black portfolio, pulled out a stack of documents, and placed the first one gently on the table, sliding it across until it stopped right in front of Alan Dershowitz. Document number 1, 15 years of practicing law. Her voice was calm, controlled, surgical. Gasps echoed through the audience. The camera zoomed in on the heading of the document, 15 years of unblemished practice. Before Dershowitz could react, she placed another document down harder this time. Document number 2, a complete list of over 200 winning cases. 200, not 20, not 50. 200 victories stacked neatly in black and white. A murmur rippled through the audience. Someone whispered, "Holy God." But Crockett wasn't finished. From the portfolio came a pristine certificate, the golden Harvard seal gleaming under the studio lights. Document number 3, graduated top 2% of her class, and underneath it another sheet bar exam score, top 1% nationwide. The reaction was immediate. The entire audience erupted. Some gasped, some applauded. Even the host struggled to breathe normally, gripping the desk as if holding onto reality itself. Dershowitz's jaw tightened. A bead of sweat slid down his temple, and then the finishing blow. Crockett placed one last item on the table, a photograph. In it, a younger Jasmine Crockett stood confidently behind a podium, lecturing at Harvard Law School. The caption below the image was unmistakable: Guest Lecturer, Harvard Constitutional Law Symposium. The room detonated. The sound wasn't just noise. It was shock, awe, disbelief, and admiration colliding all at once. The camera zoomed tight on Dershowitz's face. For the first time in his career, the Harvard Titan looked speechless. And Jasmine, she didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply leaned back in her chair, her calmness louder than any words she could have spoken. In living rooms across America, millions of viewers whispered the same thought: "Oh my God, she just destroyed him." The studio was silent, but it wasn't a calm silence. It was heavy charge, the kind that presses against your chest and steals your breath. Alan Dershowitz, the man who'd spent 5 decades dominating America's legal battlefield, was no longer in control. For the first time, the camera caught it. His eyes, they flickered. Just for a second, but it was enough. He shifted in his chair, straightening his jacket as if fabric could hide what his face could not. The pen in his right hand trembled, barely noticeable, but the camera's zoom missed nothing. He had expected Crockett to stumble. He had expected her to crumble under the weight of his name, his reputation, his Harvard crown. But now every document she placed before him was a bullet, and every fact she revealed was a strike he hadn't prepared for. The audience felt it too. You could hear a faint murmur ripple through the room, the sound of belief shifting. People who had entered the studio worshiping Dershowitz's brilliance were now staring at him, questioning, is this the same man who taught half of Congress what the Constitution even means? The pressure mounted. He reached for his glass of water, a mistake. The camera zoomed in as he lifted it, and everyone watching at home saw it, the water shaking in the glass. His hand wasn't steady anymore. The undefeated titan of constitutional law was showing cracks. The tension inside the studio was electric. Alan Dershowitz straightened his posture, his legendary Harvard composure returning as he leaned forward, his voice sharp, authoritative, cutting like a scalpel. Ms. Crockett, constitutional precedent from Marbury. Madison makes it clear the executive branch possesses implied immunities that supersede congressional overreach. His tone carried the weight of 5 decades of legal dominance. The audience leaned in, half expecting Crockett to falter under the avalanche of Harvard wisdom. But she didn't. Jasmine Crockett didn't even blink. Instead, she calmly opened one of the documents from her portfolio, her voice steady and deliberate. With all due respect, Professor, you just cited a precedent from 1803, but let's bring this into the 21st century, shall we? She slid another document across the table, a landmark Supreme Court ruling from just 2 years ago. The ruling directly contradicted Dershowitz's argument. A wave of shock swept through the audience. Even the host froze, glancing back and forth between them, as if watching 2 chess grandmasters exchange devastating moves. Dershowitz adjusted his glasses, but before he could respond, Crockett struck again. And since we're quoting history, allow me to remind you that your own published work in Harvard Law Review supports the exact opposite of what you're claiming tonight. The crowd gasped collectively. The camera zoomed in on Dershowitz's face. His jaw tightened. For the first time in years, the man who built his empire teaching law was being outmaneuvered on live television. This wasn't a Harvard lecture anymore. This was war, and Jasmine Crockett had just drawn first blood. And then it happened. A moment no one thought they would ever see. For the first time in decades, the legendary Alan Dershowitz, the man who built his name dismantling opponents with surgical precision, sat in silence. His pen, once tapping rhythmically on the table, was now frozen between his fingers. The camera zoomed in, capturing his face, his jaw clenched, his eyes darting, searching desperately for an escape for an argument that simply wasn't there. Across the nation, millions of viewers gasped. Some shouted, some clapped. Some simply stared at their screens, watching history unfold live. In living rooms, bars, college campuses, and political war rooms across America, people realized something they'd never dared to imagine. Alan Dershowitz, the Harvard giant, the untouchable courtroom legend, had just been cornered. And Jasmine Crockett. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than any argument. Her calmness shook the foundations of power, and in that one breathtaking moment, the momentum of the debate shifted forever. Within minutes of the live debate ending, social media erupted like a volcano. The hashtag Crockett credentials skyrocketed to the #1 trending spot on Twitter, generating over 6.3 million mentions in just 2 hours. Clips of Jasmine Crockett silently sliding her credentials across the table flooded TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube Shorts. Some were slowed down, some had dramatic music, but every single one carried the same message. This is how you defend your name. This is how you shut down power with facts. On Twitter, an unexpected voice entered the conversation. A Yale Law School professor with over 850K followers tweeted, "This moment will be studied in law schools for decades. It's not just legal strategy, it's a masterclass in protecting your dignity under fire." Within minutes, that tweet alone had 400,000 retweets and 1.2 million likes. Political commentators were calling it the turning point of modern legal debates. Cable news anchors replayed the moment on loop. Pundits who had once doubted Crockett's credibility were now praising her precision, composure, and courage. And Jasmine, she hadn't posted a single word. Her silence had gone viral. By the following morning, the entire legal community had entered the conversation. The American Bar Association, ABA, the largest and most respected legal organization in the United States, released an official statement that quickly went viral. True professionalism isn't about winning arguments. It's about defending your values while maintaining dignity and composure under fire. Last night, Jasmine Crockett reminded us of that. Within hours, the ABA statement was featured on CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, and the New York Times. Across the country, law professors, judges, and high-profile attorneys began sharing their thoughts. One federal judge tweeted it presided over trials for 25 years. "I've seen countless lawyers crumble under pressure. What Jasmine Crockett did last night wasn't just impressive. It was historic." Harvard Law alumni forums lit up with debates. Yale faculty hosted an emergency live stream, and legal podcasts across Spotify and Apple exploded with downloads. For the first time in years, the legal elite were united on one point: Jasmine Crockett hadn't just defended herself, she had redefined what it means to stand tall in the face of power. By the next afternoon, an unexpected ripple had turned into a national wave of inspiration. Law students from small, unrecognized schools began flooding Jasmine Crockett's office with hundreds of emails and handwritten letters. Some came from rural Alabama, others from struggling night schools in Detroit and Houston. One letter read, "Ms. Crockett, I've spent my entire life feeling invisible because I didn't go to Harvard or Yale. But when you stood your ground last night, you gave me hope that I am more than the name of my school." Across TikTok, a viral video of Jasmine sliding her credentials forward was now captioned, "Your value isn't in the name of your school, it's in the strength of your skill." In just 24 hours, the clip reached 52 million views with over 8.1 million likes and nearly 2 million comments. Young lawyers, public defenders, and even first-year students were calling Jasmine Crockett a symbol of possibility. For the first time in decades, the narrative shifted from prestige to capability. Jasmine hadn't just defended herself, she had ignited a movement. 2 days later, in a moment no one thought they would ever witness, Alan Dershowitz, the Harvard legal titan of 5 decades, walked into a crowded press conference in Washington, D.C. The room was packed. Cameras flashed, reporters leaned forward, and millions of Americans tuned in live. Dershowitz stood at the podium, his shoulders heavy, his usual confidence replaced by quiet humility. He took a deep breath and spoke. "I was wrong. I underestimated Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Her knowledge, her preparation, and her composure were extraordinary. I owe her and the American people an apology." The room fell completely silent. You could hear the clicks of cameras, but not a single reporter dared interrupt. For the first time in his 50-year career, the man known for never backing down had just admitted defeat. Within minutes, CNN, The Washington Post, and The New York Times blasted breaking news banners across their websites. Alan Dershowitz publicly apologizes to Jasmine Crockett, historic moment in U.S. legal history. Across social media, hashtags #Dershowitz Bows and #Crockett Victory shot to the top of global trends, garnering over 120 million impressions in less than 6 hours. America had just witnessed something no one thought possible: the fall of a legal giant and the rise of a new force. 6 months later, in a twist no one saw coming, Alan Dershowitz reached out to Jasmine Crockett. The man who once tried to publicly dismantle her reputation now wanted to stand beside her. At a joint press conference, Dershowitz smiled faintly and announced, "In our differences, we found strength. Congresswoman Crockett and I believe that the American people deserve open access to real constitutional education, not filtered sound bites, not political spin." Together, they launched a free nationwide online course titled Power and the People: Understanding Constitutional Authority. The response was staggering. Within 48 hours, over 10,000 students from community colleges to Ivy League universities had already enrolled. Law students posted selfies holding their laptops, tweeting quotes from Crockett's lectures. Veterans, retirees, and even high schoolers signed up, proving one thing: this wasn't just a class, it was a movement. For the first time in modern U.S. history, a bitter courtroom rivalry had transformed into a shared mission to educate, empower, and inspire the next generation. The auditorium at the University of Houston was packed. Every seat, every stairway, every corner filled with students, professors, and community leaders who came to hear Jasmine Crockett's story. The lights dimmed as Crockett stepped onto the stage dressed in a sharp charcoal gray suit, her voice calm but carrying the weight of millions. She looked directly into the cameras, into the faces of young students watching live from across the nation, and said slowly, "The law does not belong to a single school, a single title, or a single elite circle. The law belongs to everyone brave enough to fight for justice." The crowd erupted in applause, but Crockett held up her hand gently, her tone becoming softer yet more powerful. "I was once underestimated. They told me I didn't belong at the table. But here I am, not because of where I studied, but because I refused to be silent." Tears streamed down the faces of students in the front rows. Some clutched their notebooks, others recorded the moment on their phones, knowing they were witnessing history. By the time Crockett finished her speech, "Justice for All" trended across every social platform, amassing over 75 million views overnight. Jasmine Crockett was no longer just a lawyer. She had become a voice for the invisible, a beacon for those the system had long ignored. The moment Jasmine Crockett stood her ground didn't just silence Alan Dershowitz. It shook the foundations of how America viewed power, privilege, and respect. Within days, her confrontation became a cultural turning point. News outlets replayed the clip endlessly. Universities debated it in classrooms. Talk shows called it the slap heard around the legal world. For many Americans, this was bigger than a legal argument. It was a symbol. It was proof that a woman from a small law school could stand toe-to-toe with one of the most powerful legal minds in the country and win. Social media became a battlefield of ideas, with millions sharing Crockett's words under the hashtag #redefining respect. One viral post captured the feeling of an entire generation. This wasn't about Harvard versus anyone else. This was about every person who's ever been told they're not enough. Jasmine Crockett just showed us that our worth is defined by our fight, not our pedigree. By the end of the week, over 120 million views and countless messages of gratitude flooded Crockett's office. For the first time in decades, millions of Americans felt a shift of belief that their voice too could matter. The camera slowly fades out on Jasmine Crockett, her face calm, but her eyes burning with quiet determination. The studio lights dim, the debate is over, but something far bigger has just begun. Because this wasn't just a clash between two legal minds. It wasn't just about Harvard versus everyone else. This was about every person who has ever been underestimated, ignored, or dismissed. And tonight, millions watching across America saw something unforgettable: the power of truth and the courage to stand your ground. Crockett closes her folder, turns to leave the stage, and just before stepping out of the spotlight, she pauses, looks straight into the camera, and says, "Never underestimate someone because of where they came from. Never underestimate the power of courage and the strength of the truth." The screen goes black. 3 seconds of silence. Then the words appear, "This is just the beginning." Life will put you in moments where people will doubt you, dismiss you, and underestimate you. They will judge you by where you came from, what school you attended, or what they think you deserve. But Jasmine Crockett's story teaches us one unshakable truth. Your value isn't defined by your background, it's defined by your courage, your work, and your belief in yourself. When you stand up for your dignity and fight for what's right, you don't just change your own future, you inspire millions to do the same. The world doesn't belong to the loudest voices. It belongs to those who stand firm in silence, backed by truth. So the next time someone doubts you, remember Jasmine Crockett, and remember that the strongest weapon you'll ever have is your truth. If this story moved you, If you believe in justice, courage, and standing up for what's right, then don't just watch, be part of the movement. Subscribe to our channel for more untold stories the mainstream media won't show you. Like this video if Jasmine's courage inspired you, and share your thoughts in the comments because your voice matters. Together we can build a community that fights for truth, justice, and dignity. This is just the beginning.